Hello, folks. Welcome to Live Cardboard. It's good to have you back again. This is episode 13, and tonight's topic is, I'm happy to say, is an interview with Gina Willis, designer of an upcoming Blind Swords game on the Battle for Atlanta, as well as of course, designer of a few other games. But before we get there, I want to, as always, say thanks to the supporters of Pushing Cardboard. Special shout out to Michael Sunborg, who upped his subscription level after the last live stream. Thanks very much, Michael. If you'd like to become a supporter, there's a link to my Ko-Fi page in the video description. There's links to my Cube for Me and Noble Knight affiliate pages. Those are great ways to support the channel as well. And take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, all those YouTube things you do, super chat, super this and that. It's all on. I think I told you last time. Maybe did I tell you last time? We're undergoing a giant renovation here, so I'm in the basement. Everything on this level is still fine, but the top two levels are kind of almost completely gutted. So I only get in and out of the house to do this stuff sort of in the evening. So my output in terms of videos and podcasts is well, we'll see how it goes. I'm trying to keep up with everything. Certainly, my play-by-email partners will tell you that my turnaround time is been slowing down. I apologize to them, but I'm trying to keep going. I've been playing. I've been playing this while I get over it. This is the only time I get to play something on the table. This is a Maida 1806. This is from Forum Square Games. If you know those guys, they're a new company they were new a year and a half ago out of England, and they have this like really unique system on Napoleonics. Their first game was Bonaparte's Eastern Empire. I totally recommend it if you haven't seen it yet. Anyway, let's. I want to get to Gina as soon as possible. I have a few news items, so we'll do those, and then we'll get right on to the interview. So let's do some news. Okay. This you might have heard this. This kind of came out just after this news came out just after. Last time I spoke with you, but the news is Eric Lee Smith is finally republishing his classic, the Civil War 1861 to 65 game that originally came out from Victory Games. This one's a real total classic in the industry, totally beloved game. It's in many ways it was what and Mark Simonich talks about this in his designer notes for his game, the U.S. Civil War from GMT. He borrowed a lot of mechanics from Eric Lee Smith's game and sort of built upon that chassis. So anyway, it's great that this is going to be republished by Revolution. So if you know me, you know that's one of my favorite publishers. So I think he's in good hands. I'm sure have new map, new counters, the whole thing. I hope they keep the cover. I've always just loved this cover. It's kind of fantastic. But I do know that there's going to be some updates to the rules. Anybody who's played that game, they know there were a few troubling things, like if you had, especially for the Union player, if you have a bunch of really bad leaders, and the tendency was for players to just stick them up north of St. Louis and never let them get in the action. So I'm pretty sure that Eric Smith has got either his own ideas on that, or there's been tons of house rules and variants just published on BGG or in newsletters over the years. There's lots of ideas on how to fix that. Yeah, I totally agree, Robert. Revolution, they do lovely work, and if anything goes wrong, they make it right. So they're great. Oh yeah, thanks. I think we already get enough of that, Joe. Anyway, so yes, Civil War. I mean, it's not going to get out. It'll be sometime in 2026. But just the idea that it's coming, I mean, that's fantastic. For those, we're going to be talking about Blind Swords games tonight. For those of you who don't know much about the games, or don't know which one to pick or what have you, I whipped up a quick web page that does a little bit of a description and a comparison of all the Blind Swords games. So just go to pushingcardboard.com, you'll find it. Or I think I put a link in the video description here. But it's yeah, I just thought I kept getting these questions all the time about which one should I start with or which one is good. And my answer is always like, pick the battle that interests you the most and go with that one. But this little webpage will tell you a little bit about all the different ones. And then finally, I think the only other news, other than a few new games coming along, is GMT had an update. I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm not even going to go through a little bit of it because there wasn't a ton of stuff that was that I felt like I needed to pass on. The main news to me, being here in Canada, is that they finally got their international shipping sorted out, so that for P500 orders, if you are not in the US, your P500 stuff will be shipped direct from China to wherever you are, and won't have to go through the US and have that tariff, US-China tariff tacked on. Just remember, that's only for P500 items. Anything you order just off the website is going to come from their warehouse in Hanford, California, and you're going to get hit with the tariff on that one. But at least it's good news for P500 stuff. And who knows, maybe it'll even reduce the shipping costs for people. I mean, you got to think, at least for Australia, it should be a little less. Anyway, yeah, that was the big news. There's a couple of items on the P500. One was a science fiction game, so I kind of glazed over that one. And then there's an Old West game, so some kind of a gunfighter type game, I guess. In terms of new games, definitely germane to tonight. Gettysburg, the first day. Steve Carey's latest Blind Swords game is, I think people have started to get them already. I haven't got mine yet, but I think some people have started to get them. Steve's a fantastic designer, and like my guest tonight, Gina Willis, Steve is he pops into the Blind Sword Discord server quite often, and he's got interesting things to say about designing for the Blind Sword system, because he's designed 3 games for them. So anyway, that's the only thing on my radar that was interesting. And I'm happy to say, my wallet is happy to say I've only received 2 new games in the last 2 weeks, and they came in a single package. It was my Vivictus subscription. So one is Hamilcar, the Mercenary War. It's a solo game, so not really my thing, but you got to take the crunchy with the smooth, I guess. And then the other one is Sadova. I think that might be how you say it. I have no idea. Oh, hey, yeah. Jason, I set up a Blind Swords Discord server, I don't know, 2 months ago. I think I put a link in the video, in the description for this video. You can look for it there. But if not, there's definitely a link. Well, no, just I'll make sure I'll get one to you. I'll post one in the chat sometime tonight. I'll try and figure it out. But yeah, it's great because there's tons of talk on the Discord server about people playing all the different games, but then Gina and a few other designers who are working on upcoming volumes talk about it there. So yeah, it's taken off like wildfire. It's great. Yeah, that's exactly right. Totally active. Anyway, yeah, this Sadova 1866 Thunderclap in Bohemia. Something I know zero about, so I look forward to seeing it. Anyway, that's everything I have for news tonight. So let's I'm going to bring on Gina, and let's quit me talking and let's talk to Gina.
Hey everybody.
How are you?
Great.
Whoops.
There we go.
Yeah. Good to see. I think this would be better. There we go. All right. This is everybody. This is Gina Willis, designer of the upcoming game on the Battle of Atlanta. But that's not your only designs. You've been designing for a while, right? So,
Yeah.
well, say hello and then
Probably about hello, everyone, and thanks, Grant. Happy to be here on Lucky Episode 13. And yeah, I'd say I've been designing for about maybe 13 years.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, Gina was clever enough to send me a few slides about sort of her history and then leading into what she's doing now. So I'm going to just go through them and we'll talk about them, and it'll be easy to kind of follow along with your history in the game or in the hobby. Well, this is hilarious.
Here's
So
a blast from the past, right?
That my very first war game, American Heritage Series, but it was Dogfight. So
yeah, I had that one too. Broadside, I think, was under the Christmas tree one year and this is dating myself, probably in the mid 60s. My dad is probably responsible for my entire, was responsible for my entire interest in military history, because he and his brother were both World War II veterans. And he was kind of a Civil War buff. He read all the Bruce Catton trilogy and everything. And so he passed those on to me and passed on an interest in it. And we would play chess a lot and strategic kind of table games. But then one Christmas I got Broadside, and I enjoyed it just as another, rainy day pastime, like any other game a kid would play. But one thing that struck me one afternoon, I took out this little glossy booklet that came in the box, and it was a history booklet that described the actual battles on Lake Erie and Lake Ontario that had taken place, with all kinds of, full color paintings and really good articles in there. And I read it, and it suddenly, something clicked where I realized that this was not just a game, but it was actually simulating, or it was about something that really happened. And that connection between reading and playing really began right there, where I would read about something and then I'd start wondering if there was a game about it, or if I'd play a game and then it would make me want to read a book. So
yeah, I think Dogfight had the same thing, a little book, and it talked about Eddie Rickenbacker and the Hat in the Ring gang, and it was exactly the same connection. Like that game is like nothing. It's really not anything about. It's not anything like actually dogfighting, but it still hooked me on World War I air games.
Well, I think there's a lesson to be learned for the modern day here, because a lot of times you'll see threads on Board Game Geek or elsewhere where people will say, why don't we have more gateway games for young folks? Or why don't we have simpler rules like for entry-level war games? And what I think was especially cool about the Broadside and Dogfight games and all those, they didn't condescend or talk down to the players. Like, they didn't dumb it down. The rules were simple. They fit on the inside of the box lid. So the games were not deep war games, but they took the history seriously, as what I guess I would say. In other words, they came with a history book so that if you wanted to learn more and you wanted to kind of graduate to meatier games, it kind of gave you that entry point a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's led to me having a lifelong obsession with designer's notes and historical notes.
Right.
If a game doesn't have that, I feel like I've somehow been shortchanged when I opened the box.
I've even bought some games just because I heard the designer notes were great.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, there was. Let me see. Yeah, the game Panzer Command has amazing designer notes from the Victory Games era.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it's supposed to be a decent game as well. I haven't played that one.
Yeah, it's the ancestor. It basically was the DNA for the tactical. What is it? Grand Tactical series.
Grand Tactical, right.
MMP. Yeah, that was the granddaddy of all those chip pull games. Yeah.
This slide is this Combat Mission?
Yes, that was a map I did for Combat Mission 2. the reason we're showing a picture of a computer game is that I was like a board war gamer, and I had a strategy and tactics subscription when I was in high school, but I could never find people to play with, and I pretty much shelved all the war games, when I left school for years and years. So I stopped playing. Yeah, Eric Lee Smith. So it was around maybe the early 2000s that I started to realize that there were computer war games that were reminiscent of the board war games I used to play, and that had really cool graphics. And I got into a spell of like flight simulators and things like that. But Combat Mission 2 really intrigued me because it was tactical, but it had a designer aspect to it where you could make your own maps. So I really loved taking like Google Earth terrain and then making an authentic down to the meter, map of a piece of Normandy. And what that led to was virtually online, somebody I've still never met in person and I played a game of Joseph Balskowski's St. Lo, which is an operational scale World War II Normandy game. And that the units are like battalions and companies. Yeah, there it is. So we played a vassal game of that. And then when we had an interesting situation, we would stop the game in vassal and say, okay, let's set it up in Combat Mission 2 and see what it looks like, And so I would make like the actual terrain of the real place in France and get the order of battle, and we'd go and play the game. And then we'd go on and feed the data back in and play the campaign some more. And so it just became this amazing thing that went on for maybe a year, where I still talk about it because it's one of those things that's hard to accomplish in real life, to play a 2-level game and actually follow through with someone else. But we both really enjoyed the experience, and it kind of got me hooked on a theme that's gone through my whole design career so far, which is this whole idea of tactical and operational games twin together in some way.
Yeah, and that's there's a lot of players for whom that is like they talk about it all the time. Wouldn't it be cool if we played and then when we get to the battle, then we'll move to tactical and do it. And players are always talking about that, but it's you rarely see it acted upon.
Right.
More tactical.
Yes, more tactical. Well, as you already know now that I was interested in the War of 1812 on the Great Lakes. So I happened to be in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I visited the excellent maritime museum they have there. And I saw, great dioramas and exhibits about the ships. And that got me thinking 3D printing was just kind of coming into style right then. So I started playing around with 3D printing, and I decided I would make a fleet, of the ships that fought on Lake Ontario. And I was looking around for a rule set and couldn't quite find one I liked. And that's really what started sending me down the design path, because the rules were never quite right. So I started adapting rule sets that I found in order to make an operational game. And that's really what led to A Glorious Chance, which was my first commercially published war game.
That might be the next slide. Yes.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Doing what I do now, I've interviewed a lot of designers, and the percentage of them that say their first game was because they were unhappy they had a subject they liked and were unhappy with everything on the market and had to make their own. It's a common starting point, I think.
It is the tinkering and making mods for things, where I might make a scenario for a game that I had that would just not exist, where the game appealed to me, but there was nothing on it.
A Glorious Chance, was this your first, the first published, the first thing that came out?
It's not the first one that came out.
Right.
And
that's what I thought.
It's the first one I did. So it was my first design, but it actually took so long to develop and print that Skies Above Britain actually came out before it. So the publishing Skies Above Britain came out first.
And Jerry White is one of my all-time favorite people in the hobby, and I would be surprised if he wasn't yours as well. Mm. How did you end up teaming up with Jerry, and how did that go?
Well, it went fantastically well, and it's made me miss collaboration and co-design ever since. Really, I think ever since, been trying to recreate that experience. Part of the reason I share so much about my ongoing design on Discord in that Blind Swords channel is because it kind of scratches that itch I had to talk about something while I was doing it. Because really, to be honest, designing war games is a very lonely process. It takes a long time. You're doing it by yourself usually. And some people like working in secret and then unveiling their great, vision. But I come from a newspaper background in my day jobs where I was always working in a collaborative team situation. And I probably would have loved working at SPI back in the days when everybody was in an office together, but that's very rare nowadays. Everybody's kind of in their silo. So I really like collaborating. Jerry was wonderful to collaborate with. But the way that came about, and this is a story I've told before, so I apologize if anyone already knows it, but I've always liked and been interested in the Battle of Britain. But what happened was I saw Jerry's game about the air war over Germany,
Skies Above the Reich.
Skies Above the Reich. And when I started seeing reviews of it, I realized and started playing it. I said, this is a fantastic system. But I really don't enjoy playing as the Germans. And I also think that this system could just be a fantastic playable way to do the Battle of Britain, attacking the bombers, but you're the RAF.
Yeah.
And I floated that on Board Game Geek, just as a fan, kind of as a super fan, I guess.
I know how this goes.
Right. And then, of course, other players started saying, yeah, we really should have that. Come on, Jerry, come on, do it. And the designers said, well, folks, we explored this and considered it. And we decided this system for Skies Above the Reich is just not suitable for a number of reasons. Plus, we're burned out from doing that game on that system, but also it's just not suitable for the Battle of Britain. And so we're not going to do it. And so I guess I kind of took that as a throwing down of the gauntlet almost, like instead of like, oh, okay, I had designed a game already myself. So I thought, well, hell, if there isn't one, I'll just make one and I'll play it myself for my own enjoyment if I have to. But I'm going to show that it can be done. And maybe they don't want to, but I'm going to do one. And so I did. I went ahead and designed it. It was, I would call a pretty slavish imitation of Skies Above the Reich in the sense that I didn't really change. I only changed the system as much as I felt I absolutely needed to make it work as the Battle of Britain. But even then, it was pretty much a porting of that game over to the Battle of Britain with just different aircraft types and some special rules and components. And I made the prototype and I took it with me to GMT West to show them. And Gene immediately loved it and said, we wanted, but we need to talk to Jerry because, we're only going to do it as a Skies Above game because it's his series if he likes it and he gives it the green light too. Well, to make a long story short, I think they were skeptical. Jerry might have been skeptical when he first got it in his hands, but once he started pushing it around on the table, I could see that it was starting to get his creative juices flowing because he would start saying, well, we could do something like this. And I see what you're doing. I don't really think that works, but I think this could work. So before you knew it, and this is, I was kind of rubbing my hands like, this is just what I wanted to happen because I got him interested in doing that. And in spite of himself, he kind of found himself involved. And then the two of us really consciously decided we would team up and actually do it. And I think we both had a great time doing it. And we're very proud of the game. I'm really delighted to see it's rated so high on BGG. A lot of avid players still. And I think continuing with that theme I mentioned about 2-level games, with the operational tactical, one thing that doesn't get talked about as much, but is in the game in Skies Above Britain is that I made sure that there were rules in there where if you wanted to, you could take John Butterfield's RAF and play the entire Battle of Britain. And then whenever you had a mission where you could pick a squadron in RAF, and then you could, using these rules that are optional in Skies Above Britain. You could set it up in Skies and play out the patrol, jump into your cockpit and play, and then go back to the operational game. And the rules are in there to do it. And I've heard that people have done it a little bit. I've never seen a complete AAR, and I would love to, because I'm really curious. I've never really gone all the way through one myself, but I've heard that at places like ComSom World Expo, somebody told me they saw people doing that.
When a couple years ago, when I interviewed Jerry, he told me that story, but he was like, he really was knocked out by what you brought in. He was like, I didn't think it was going to work. And then she showed, and he said, he didn't say like he was eating crow, but it was like, it was just one step back. Like he was like, my God, look at this. I was totally wrong. She was totally right. We've got to do this.
But what was really special is that then stimulated a whole new level of innovation in the system, because anyone who plays it will say that the whole system of fighter versus fighter combat is really the main event. And that's all Jerry. You know, he just created a whole new system for the fighter versus fighter aspect that I think took everything to a whole new level.
Well, yeah, he's a pretty amazing designer, no doubt about it. Speaking though of RAF.
Oh yeah.
That's John Butterfield.
Yes, that's John Butterfield. And that's us 2 Octobers ago, I think, at GMT West. And that's where I demoed and play tested a game that I did for Revolution. It has not been published or even formally announced yet, but I think people have heard of it. And it's been on the table there and also at SD HistCon that fall, called Night Drop Screaming Eagles. And those of you familiar with Battles magazine, it's defunct now, but
such a great magazine.
It was a great magazine. And a lot of people were sorry to see it fizzle out, but during that time it published 2 games in a series called Night Drop. One was on the 82nd Airborne drop, the Night Drop, and then the second one was Night Drop 2, which was Pegasus Bridge. Yeah, it was the British drop. But they never did anything on the 101st Airborne on that part of the Night Drop. And I just innocently asked one time the designer, Laurent Closier, had he ever considered doing a Night Drop 3 and would he be interested in collaborating, you know, on a Screaming Eagles version of it? Because I had some ideas for one, and I also thought that it could be a really good solitaire system, because generally in D-Day games, speaking of, again, the Butterfield tradition, you know, he's also said this, that a lot of times the German side in D-Day games doesn't have a lot to do, or it's primarily reactive and defensive. And so generally those are good scenarios for solitaire games, because you can be the active player and active side, and the AI can run the Germans. So I noticed also that the Player's Aid had done a playthrough of Night Drop 2 where Alexander invented a few little solitaire gizmos to take care of some of the hidden information that's in that game. And so that got my wheels turning, and I thought, okay, what if I just do a Night Drop Screaming Eagles, but just build on the chassis that Laurent had done, but really not make it part of that series where you can't join them together, but it's a standalone, but it's going to build on some of the things that I like about that system, but also make it an entire solitaire system in and of itself. So it's no hidden information. It's got a card-driven AI solitaire, and that's what Night Drop Screaming Eagles is.
Of course, if it was John Butterfield, he makes it with solitaire either way and both. He's sort of the master of that.
Right. Yeah, I didn't do a 2-player option on this one. It didn't really interest me. I'm sure people could do that. And Revolution had kind of asked whether I was interested in adding that on. And then after they played it enough, they said, no, it's not really necessary. It works fine, just as a solitaire.
That's so funny, because the real trend in wargaming right now is with all the 2-player games. If you design a 2-player games, the publishers are saying, yeah, but do you have a solo mode? Do you have a solo bot? So it went the other way for you on this one. Very good.
Yeah.
And now now we're going to, I think, start talking about what you're working on right now.
Okay. Well, the work on this actually started many decades ago with a little bit of genealogy, actually. I discovered sometime in the 1980s, I was researching my Civil War ancestors, and one of my distant relatives told me that I had a distant cousin who had been killed in the Battle of Atlanta. And at that time, I just knew of the Battle of Atlanta as something that was in Gone with the Wind, like that's all I knew about the Battle of Atlanta. There was a big fire and the city burned down. And then there was Sherman's March to the Sea. And I think that's really most of what most people know about it, because it's not a battle that gets all the press and the coverage that Gettysburg and Bull Run and all the big Eastern Theater battles got. But it was hugely consequential. And of course, I had a special interest in it because of Cousin Charlie. This was Charles Webster. He enlisted in late 1862, I think, in what was the 66th Illinois Western Sharpshooters. And he was actually from Michigan, but this is interesting. In the Western Union Army of the Tennessee, a lot of the regiments that were called like Illinois or Michigan actually oftentimes would have companies from other states in them. So it was called this, this regiment went through a number of different names, but eventually after Shiloh got the name of the 66th Illinois, it originally started out as Burge's Western Sharpshooters, and then it was the 66th Illinois. He was not at Shiloh. He joined after that, but he basically was in Mississippi, I think, with his unit, and Tennessee. And then finally, his big campaign was the Atlanta campaigns right from the very beginning. And if anybody knows about the Atlanta campaign, you will recognize the 66th Illinois, because this was pretty much the Army of the Tennessee's shock troops. They were they became an elite unit that was oftentimes at the tip of the spear and the first ones to assault in a number of the battles of that campaign. And Cousin Charlie was right in there with them each time. Unfortunately, by the time they got to Atlanta, he met his fate, and he was killed in action that day. But I was fascinated by that, and I wanted to learn more about, where was he? Where was his unit? What did the battlefield look like? What happened? So, right, and as a war gamer, of course, that means, I got to find a game on it. And even to this day, there are very few games about the Battle of Atlanta. I think there's maybe one or two, and none, and they're all pretty old, most of them too. So I was always interested in doing a game on it. I tried once in the mid 80s to do it, but I had no idea what I was doing. And we didn't have the internet back then. And the only guide I had was SPI. I don't know if you ever saw this. They had a paperback guide to wargaming design. It was called like The Art of Wargame Design or something. It was a great book, and it made me feel like I could do it. It had chapters on how to do a map and how to do counters. But I pretty much just launched into making components, because I thought it was fun, without really thinking that carefully about the system I was doing, so it was a mess. But I've always wanted to do a game on it. And it was not until Blind Swords came along that I really saw the potential and said, this is the system I think I could do it in, because it makes these battles playable. And it's got the tactical graininess that I like, but it's also playable enough that you could do Atlanta and still have it work.
And so, this is that's one of your playtest.
Yeah, there's a playtest map. It's on my table right now. I've been posting a lot about it during the design process on the Discord channel.
Gina has been fantastic. She's probably been our most vocal Discorder on that channel, but and that's saying a lot, because there's quite a few people who are very active. But we'll get to some of this stuff a little bit later too. But you've been really good about talking about some of the challenges of how does Blind Swords address problem X or problem Y. We'll talk about some of those at the end. But
sure. Yeah. What would you like to know about the Atlanta?
Well, I think. I just wanted to let folks know about, maybe you could talk about I think there's 5 scenarios and the campaign game.
No, there's 6 scenarios. Well, there's 6 scenarios, one of which is the full battle game.
Right. Yeah.
So then there's 5 smaller ones that are all basically pieces of the big battle.
Right.
And they're in sort of chronological order too. Yeah, I think
It's
you've got
just
them
it's
there. So it
that
starts with July 21st, Bald Hill. And on that map you just showed, it's that little pink circle is Bald Hill. Yeah,
right.
that lower circle is where Bald Hill is. And that was really the key terrain. That's the highest elevation on the entire battlefield. From there, if you looked west, if you put a gun there, you could bombard Atlanta, and you could basically see any part of that battlefield from Bald Hill. It was not a particularly steep hill, and it wasn't a big slope, but it was just rolling terrain with ravines and creeks. But this happened to be the highest elevation that had a really good visibility. And so it became a key objective for both sides to hold at all costs. And so that was a battle on the 21st. Then once the Union captured that, there was the famous counterattack by the Confederates, where they did a night march around the left flank of the Union Army and then attacked by noon the following day. And so that's where the first scenario on July 22nd comes, collision course, where that's the 16th Corps in the rear that takes the initial hit from Hardee's Corps of the Confederate Army. Then there's Hardee's Tactics, which includes both the 16th and 17th Corps sectors of the action that day. Then there's one that's just about the action around Bald Hill, that you must hold the hill scenario, where it's mostly the 17th Corps. Then there's Give Me Every Gun You Have. That's an exciting one along the railroad line, where the Confederates actually historically broke through, and Major General Logan rallied the Union Army just in time to stop what would have been a disaster for the Army right then at that point in the battle. And then finally, the sixth scenario is the full Battle of Atlanta with the master map and everything.
I can't wait.
I also did, just as an aside, originally I also had a scenario for the Battle of Decatur, which also happened on July 22nd. And that was going to be in the game as one of the scenarios, but I decided to switch it out because, number one, it's a separate battle about 6 miles to the east. It doesn't use any of the same map. So it would have had a separate map. It would have had mostly kind of a separate counter set. And in the interest of economizing on the counter sheets and the maps, and also just keeping the focus on Atlanta, I decided that Decatur might still come to light someday, like as a standalone, maybe a magazine game,
Right.
or maybe even a solitaire. You know, I've talked to Revolution about this. They said, boy, if there was ever a solitaire system for Blind Swords, you know, like an optional solo, that would really be cool. And you know, have you ever thought of doing that? And could you do it? So I was playing with some solitaire elements in the Decatur scenario, and that's kind of why I'm holding it back too, because I think it gives me time to mess around with more, and maybe it could be suitable for that.
Right.
As a standalone. But back to Atlanta, yeah, there's a few of the elements that you see in it. My cousin's regiment, the 66th Illinois, at their own expense, outfitted themselves with Henry repeating rifles. So those things could fire amazingly, you know, amazing rate of fire there. And that's part of why they were used as assault troops as well. But there were at least 2 or more regiments in the game that had Henrys. And so I did include a special line on the range table for them. I felt they were worth it. Then another thing that shows up in Atlanta were the 20-pound Parrott guns. Again, there weren't that many. There were maybe 2-3 batteries of them. But one of those batteries in particular, the Digress battery, is very famous because it was the focal point of that action where the Confederates broke the line. And it also is the subject of the Atlanta cyclorama. That moment when that battery was captured and recaptured is what you see in the cyclorama. And those were the 20-pound Parrots. So for those reasons, I thought it would be worth including a little bit of chrome so that you could have the 20-pound Parrots and they'd have a little extra effect. Off-map artillery. Now that's interesting. Do you think you can put that slide of the battlefield up again so I can show people what I mean?
There we go.
Yeah, there we go. If you look up to the north edge of the map, you can see a little hex that's really on the map border. It's got that little blue tag on it. That's the off-map artillery hex. And what that represents is there were actually guns that were about 3 more hexes distance off the map in that direction. That's where Sherman's headquarters was. And during the battle, he made a decision to let the Army of the Tennessee fight by itself without much help from the other 2 armies. He had 2 other armies, in Atlanta, but around Atlanta, but he decided to let this army fight it on its own by itself. But then when things started to go badly for them, he put his thumb on the scale a little bit, because he told some of the gun commanders to give me every gun you have and to bring some spare artillery over to a ridge right in front of his headquarters where they could form kind of a grand battery and enfilade the Confederates as they were crossing where that arrow is through the railroad line. And it's a matter of debate how many guns there actually were there, but I include, what I did was I just made an event chit where whenever it gets drawn, you get to fire some guns that were in that off-map battery hex. And there's a special line on the range table that basically accounts for that extra distance and that gun type. So I tried to get them to the point where they can be useful for the Union player, but they're not so powerful that they make the game hopeless or basically spoil the fun. So I'm fine. I think I found that happy place, but we'll see as play testing goes on. But that's an example of a design choice, because what I could have done is I could have just included that part of the map. Normally what you do is you just include that part of the map and you put those on the map, right? But what that would have done is it would have forced me to include all these Union units that just basically sat in fortifications up there and never really played a role in the Atlanta battle. So I think for the interest of efficiency and keeping the focus where the action was, it made more sense to abstract it and put it off map like that and have a few rules to accommodate it.
Yeah, I think that was a great idea, because having units that don't do anything drives players crazy,
right?
And so you're really just having you're having the one unit that actually does something, and that's all you really need.
Right. And then there's smoke effects, and that again, it wasn't me saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be cool to add chrome and smoke effects into a Blind Swords game?" It had more to do with looking at the historical situation and pushing cardboard around and saying, well, what would it take for the historical outcome to actually happen on the game board? Do the Confederates, if I just don't give them the smoke effect, can they accomplish what they accomplished? And the answer was kind of no. I mean, yes, they had an advantage because the Union didn't have any defenders in that railroad cut. There was an arrogant Union general. His staff told him, "Sir, this railroad cut really is a vulnerability in the line. Shouldn't we put some barricades in there, or maybe put some guns or troops in the railroad cut?" And he said, "Oh, we'll be having dinner in Atlanta by tonight. We don't need to be doing that." And he just brushed it off, and he didn't do it. So here was this part of the 15th Corps line up there that had no defenders. And it just so happened that when Cheatham's Corps attacked from the west from Atlanta, the accumulated battlefield smoke that had been from the battle that had been raging for 2 hours drifted over that part of the battlefield and made it almost impossible for any of the defenders to see very far. So it almost was like smoke in a World War I or World War II battle, where unintentionally the Confederates had the benefit of smoke cover. They were able to get and actually infiltrate right through that railroad cut. One brigade found a way through and actually got through the line and past it before the Union even knew they were there. And so I had to think of a way that could happen in the game, because we have things like opportunity fire. And if you don't do something, then the opportunity fire would just kill them as they try to go through that railroad cut, right? So I had to think of something. And so I came up with the idea of a smoke effect, where it's really pretty simple. It just means when there's smoke in effect, and it's everywhere on the map when smoke is declared, there's basically no opportunity fire. And there's also no supportive defensive fire. So those are two types of fire that are not allowed. And then there's also a special line on the range table that has a little cloud, smoke cloud icon that is like a special smoke range. So in other words, everything's the same. You know, I didn't have to change the system or the game very much, but just by putting that little icon with a different set of numbers on the chart, you now have a very easy way to say, oh, it's a smoke turn. I'm just using the number inside the smoke instead of the number that's normally not inside the smoke cloud. And that basically, it just shortens everything by basically one column shift, I think. And but those two things together actually do kind of reproduce the effect of that poor accuracy and poor visibility.
And you've got it in, it comes at a certain time, but you've also got it can randomly come at another time. So it's not.
That's right. That's right.
It's not super scripted.
Right. I wanted to have it at a certain time because that's a historical time it was there. And because that's right at the time the Confederates probably need it, because they're arriving at the point where they would go through the railroad cut. At least in my play test, that's the turn it should be to make it work. But I also thought I don't want the game to be predictable so that everybody knows there's always going to be smoke that turn. And so I did create an event on the fog of war table. And for those of you who know the system, there's a chit called Fog of War. And when that chit comes out, you look on a special table and roll dice. And that can be lots of different kinds of flukes or events that might have happened historically. It's one of the things that makes Blind Swords so much fun, is because you have these oddball events, but they don't take over the game. And you don't feel as if the game is just luck, but there's just this little opportunity for these weird, crazy things to happen, as they really did, you know, where a unit will suddenly make a wayward move, or where a brigade may suddenly pull back and leave its neighbor brigade unsupported and things like that. So anyway, the smoke effect can also happen by a fog of war event. Oh, and the supply wagon train, I'm sorry to say, that was part of the Decatur scenario that I took out of the game. So that will not be in the Atlanta game.
And how about town combat?
Town combat, that's also not in the Atlanta game. That's Decatur, the town of Decatur. Well, sorry about that.
There we go. Then,
yeah, but those are two interesting things that would be in the Decatur game. If I did. Yeah.
Well, here's your. This has to do with
there's the rapid fire. Yeah. And so that Decatur solitaire scenario thing will be coming out. That won't
come out. But
but the top paragraph will be in the game there.
People probably can't see it, but when you get this chit, you can use it to get a 4-column shift, which is a great shift, but with a decent chance of being hit with low ammo.
Yes. Yeah. And here's what's interesting. At first, you might go, oh, my goodness, 4 columns. I mean, isn't that pretty extreme? Isn't that just going to make these guys like machine gunners? You know, it's going to be too powerful. Well, actually, no, because what I've found in playtesting is, first of all, the rapid fire chit doesn't come out that often unless you want to make it your key chit. And you can't afford to do that too often if you're the Union player. You've got too much else to do. But if you really want it, you can make that your key chit. Okay. But first of all, you've only got maybe 3 regiments that can do it. And they may not always be in a position to use it, you know, engaged. Okay. But even if you have that, it's not as powerful as you might think. It's really powerful sometimes, but what's interesting is the threat of it is powerful. So what's really cool is you have these units that have an RR rating for rapid, repeating rifle. So the Confederate player can see those counters and knows they have repeating rifles. But what the Confederate player doesn't know is whether the Union player is holding one of those rapid fire chits. So basically, you've got this constant worry as the Confederates, before you engage one of those RR units, you've always got to wonder, I wonder if he's got one of those chits ready to fire on me. And a lot of times the player either doesn't have one or the Union player has one, but they're holding it back because they think later in the turn they're going to be able to make better use of it. And sometimes you guess wrong and you got the chit and you waited too long and you never get the chance to use it.
The
So
story
all
of my
kinds-
life in
yeah.
Blind Swords. It
Right,
happens to me all
right.
the time.
Yeah, so it doesn't overpower the game at all, but I think it adds a really good historical element.
And like you said, there's only certain units that have that RR weapon designation. It's not like it's a free for all for everybody.
No.
That's the
Yeah.
Sherman shit. This is about the. This
That's
is about the
yeah,
off-bar
I
artillery.
changed it from Sherman to off-map artillery just to
Right.
make it clearer, you know. So now the picture is of some artillery guns or something, but it's the same rule, and it's just when you draw that chit, that's when you get to fire those points of artillery. There are actual counters that go in that off-map box. There are 2 batteries that go in there, but they don't have any range on the counter, so you know they're the off-map ones because the range is traced from the off-map hex.
Right.
And they're just, you know, you just get to fire them. But what the value is that you're firing them out of sequence, because normally you have an artillery phase at the beginning of a turn where you alternate steps, and the Union fires artillery and the Confederate, and then that's all over, and there's never any more artillery fire for the rest of the turn. But in this case, if you're the Union player and you've got that chit, that means that you do have a chance to kind of almost hit a target of opportunity, because that chip might come out and you could hold it and then fire it when you have a chance to really get somebody.
It's the idea of Sherman sort of like stepping in and almost he doesn't really direct the battery, but it almost feels like he does, right? He says like, I need a bunch of guns. It feels like he's just stepping in and doing the work of somebody below his.
Yeah,
his
he kind of did. People remarked on it, but he just sat his horse right there. They were really worried that he'd get hit maybe, and they were worried about him getting hit because it was pretty close to the action. And he really did direct the fire in one way where, you know, I mentioned the Digress battery being captured near the railroad cut there. As soon as that battery was captured, Sherman told one of those batteries off map to aim at the battery horses and kill the horses so that the Confederates couldn't remove the guns. And that's what they did. So it was partly due to Sherman's directing those guns that they weren't able to capture those and drag them away.
It's those little pieces that make these games like so fun, right? It's like they have those just like little tiny bits if you can manage to work them in.
Yeah.
You talk about this earlier, but this is I just wanted to have people be able to see your. Those are the little clouds with your.
This is the standard range chart, but you can see a few differences. One is I've got a few new categories. One is large rifled cannon, and that's referring to those 20-pound Parrott batteries. So all that means is that they're pretty much the same, but they have a little bit more range. Well, wait, they look identical on there, don't they? I think there might be anyway, they're designed to have a little bit more range, and then they get a column shift when there's 4 points of large rifled cannon firing. They get a +1 shift, so they have a little bit more power. And then I've got the off-map artillery line on the bottom. That's the one that when they're firing from that hex off-map. And then you can see the repeating rifle RR line up on the top in the middle line there, and that's they have a little bit less. They can't fire at extreme range the way the rifled muskets can. But those cloud icons are what we were talking about. And if it was a smoke turn, you'd use the numbers inside the cloud rather than the regular number.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's a kind of a decent effect, but no big rule. Just everything kind of happens right on the chart.
Yeah. It's already baked in.
That's sweet. This was just something you'd written about a bit on the Discord server that I was like, I just wondered if you could talk about that challenge.
Well, let's see. Yeah, that came up more on the Bald Hill scenario where Union artillery did play a big role in helping them win that. Yeah, because I mean, when you design it, the order of battle is what it is. You know, you've got the guns that were there, and you know what the gun types were, and you know where they were, and then you just let the system play and see whether it reproduces what you expect to have seen based on the history. And sometimes it falls short. So I just do that first. First, I just play it without any bells and whistles, and I just see if it works. If it doesn't, then I say, okay, we've got a little bit of a simulation failure. So I need, as a designer, to think of some ways. I can't suddenly magically create more guns that weren't there, and I know that, so I've got to think of some ways that maybe they fire or something about it that I'm missing, so that was a challenge, I'd say, but I think ultimately it came through. There's a question about what's my biggest challenge in designing Atlanta. Let me think. I think it was probably that reproducing the smoke and the railroad cut and the effect of the Confederates being able to break the line, and to have that be possible, and to have the Union rally, because there's a counterpart to it. We haven't gotten into this other event, but there's another event called McPherson and Revenge. I
think it's coming up in a couple slides.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is the counterpart. So you've got the one thing where the smoke helps the Confederates break through the line, but then once a turn ends and the Confederates are occupying some of those Union victory hexes, there's a Union counterattack event where it's called McPherson and Revenge, where you actually have 4 chits that all go into the cup in the following turn, that are almost like having 4 versions of General Logan. Instead of his one CIC chit that can activate 1 brigade out of sequence, suddenly he goes out of the cup, but there's 4 of these McPherson and Revenge chits, which is what he was shouting when he rode to rally the line, McPherson and Revenge. So you can activate 4 Union brigades without affecting their activation status, and that allows you to just make a lot of very fast responses and basically counter the Confederate breakthrough. And what's interesting is, because I just played it in my latest play test, it does seem to be working just about the way it should historically, where the Union takes a real beating for a large part of the game, but then there's this point where the Confederates kind of wear themselves out, and they do manage to break the Union line, but they don't get very far past it before the Union is able to start rallying and throwing fresh troops in and blocking it off, and then the tide starts to swing the other way.
And that circled spot there, that's the railroad.
That's where they broke through, right? That's where the Confederates broke through at the railroad cut, right?
And that sort of that triggers
yes
the McPherson and Revenge.
Right. There are 4 of those that go into the cup, and then they're single use. So you use those 4 in that one turn, and then they go away, and Logan's regular CIC chit comes back. So it's just this little special shot of adrenaline that goes into the Union Army when Logan is rallying them, and he was riding all over the place, just getting troops and throwing them in. It was just one of these amazing moments in military history, and you really can't design a game on the Battle of Atlanta without addressing that in some way, because it's such a key feature of what that battle was and what it meant.
Those 4 chits really do feel like that idea of him going down the line, and that was a genius way to accomplish that. I think it's great.
I think it's Herman's system. I mean, the genius is in the system. I'm just an implementer. I just look for ways to use what they've left me in order to make things happen. That's all.
Well, there's a couple of questions about 1812, so we'll.
Okay.
Might as well address those.
Competitive. You mean a 2-player?
I think that's what he's.
Okay.
Yeah, competitive 2-player. I think that's what John is looking for.
Well, actually, A Glorious Chance is actually based on and descended from a multiplayer game. There was a man, unfortunately, he's no longer with us, who lived in Washington State. And once a year, he was a naval miniatures enthusiast. And once a year, his name was Dave, and he would have what he called Dave's Naval Game. And he would get his friends together over a big table of naval miniatures and fight a specially designed tournament multiplayer naval game. And one year he did a game based on the war on Lake Ontario with miniatures, and he posted a blog about it and he shared the rules that he used for it. And that was a multiplayer tournament game. And that was when I looked at that, being a person who favors solo designs, I looked at the multiplayer game and said, I wonder how I could do this into a solitaire game. But actually it originated as a multiplayer tournament game.
There was a game that came out a couple of years ago that's called War of 1812, War on the Great Lake Frontier,
right?
Which is a really interesting game. That it's all about. It does have land units, but they basically just skirt around, for the most part, around the lakes.
Yeah, I would recommend that game or Gilbert Collins's game on the War.
Yeah, Mr. Madison's War. Yeah,
right, Mr. Madison's War. Those would be the games I'd steer you towards if you want a competitive multiplayer or two-player Great Lakes game. Because really, I did experiment a little during design with a two-player version of A Glorious Chance. It became kind of almost like a combat commander thing with competitive card play. And the people who tried it, I had some outside playtesters try it. They enjoyed it, but the rule books were very large to begin with for A Glorious Chance, and I really felt like it was just going to overload the whole thing by trying to also do like yet another set of rules for a two-player, and also frankly, they just didn't get tested enough to really feel like I could include them, so I never did.
Maybe it's something that could be added on later, like an expansion.
Yeah.
Okay.
If the game ever got popular enough, I think it's still pretty much of a niche title. It hasn't sold, all that great. It's gotten good reviews, but it hasn't sold that great.
It's too bad. I love 1812 games. It's one of my favorite things. Well, back to the Civil War. Jason wants to know about how you go about your map making.
Sure. It's 1864 actually. So I just do a lot of research online. I used a combination. First of all, I start from the premise that no one map is going to be 100% accurate. And I think as a designer, you kind of have to look at all the maps of where you're designing for and almost do a composite. You kind of have, it's like you're a jury evaluating the evidence in a case and deciding which ones are credible. And like maybe this particular road ran over this way, or maybe it ran a little that way. And based on the preponderance of evidence and your own judgment about tactically how it feels when you're playing it, you start to get a feeling for where something should go. But generally what I did was I started with the American Battlefield Trust maps of Atlanta, which are online. They're very good. And what's good about them too is they superimpose the Atlanta battle over the modern day street grid, because those of you who've ever looked at Atlanta, you know that the entire battlefield has been absorbed by the city and the suburbs, so it doesn't exist anymore. There's almost nothing left of the Atlanta battlefield. And even Bald Hill, which was the focal point of the battle, was leveled off and destroyed to make a highway interchange in the 60s. So really, we talk about war games as being a paper time machine. And I think one of the nice things about doing this game is that it makes the Atlanta battlefield alive again, because unlike Gettysburg or Antietam, you can't go there and visit it the same way and see where how the battle looked to the participants. But if you play this game, you can see, probably the closest war game representation of what it did look like. So I used the Battlefield Trust map. I used Google Earth, and they have an elevation feature on there, so you can kind of get a sense for where the contours would have been. I used contemporary maps in the National Archives that were drawn by Civil War engineers that kind of had that cross-hatching, where they were accurate in terms of certain things, but they weren't really perfectly to scale, so you had to interpret them a bit. But by using all of those and then doing overlays, I was able to pretty much figure out how it looked. I will also do a shout out to a man in Atlanta who's a war game designer for miniature scenarios named Brad Butkovich. And he is an excellent expert on the battles, all the battles of the Atlanta campaign, and he's done a series of books. I don't know if you can see this, but there's one called Atlanta Besieged by Brad Butkovich, and this particular one has all these great miniature scenarios with detailed maps, and so his book was invaluable as a resource for figuring out a lot of the terrain as well.
When you think about like some even Gettysburg or Antietam, where there's no city there, even in places like that, the vegetation is different. Right. That's hard enough, but to have to deal with the additional step of now it's completely built up as an urban environment. It's like just an added thing that you have to sort of work your way through as a map designer.
Yeah, going back to that question, what was the hardest thing to design? I'd say that was the hardest thing, not the tactical thing of the railroad cut or the smoke, because those things suggested themselves to me as I was designing. The hard part really was trying to recreate a battlefield that no longer exists by using a whole bunch of different sources combined. But I found that to be a really fascinating process because by looking at all the maps together, I could see the picture emerging. Like I could see that overall. Can you show the map again, maybe?
Yes, it is. I think it's number 10.
Okay, so really, although it looks complex, really it's pretty simple because the main things to be aware of are Bald Hill, that pink circled high elevation. That's level 6 terrain. It's the only level 6 hex on the map. Everything else is level 5 and below. And then basically what you've got is you've got two ridges. There's a ridge. The colors don't stand out very well in this, but there's a ridge basically going from northwest to southeast where you can see that tan color. That's a big ridge that runs the entire length of the map. There's that ridge, and that roughly is where Bald Hill is and the Union line is running. They're on that ridge. Then you've got another ridge that's going west to east, which is the ridge that the railroad line is running on. So you've got these two intersecting ridges and Bald Hill that dominate the battlefield and are basically the terrain everybody was fighting over. And that's where most of the key fighting took place. Then what you have is these creek valleys. You can see where the waterways are going. You've got a creek valley running northwest to southeast and a mill pond down in the southeast corner. And then you've got another creek valley off to the lower left that really doesn't come into play very much. But basically you've got this major creek valley that becomes a factor in the battle. And then you've got these two ridges. And really that pattern, I would say that I could see the skeleton or the skeleton of the battlefield underneath the modern day landscape as I looked at it. I could see because the topography really, other than Bald Hill being scraped away, that really didn't change very much. The elevations are still what they were pretty much. So I was looking mostly at that, and then you just kind of see where the water would be, and you can see where it would flow, and you can see where the low-lying areas were, where it would be marshy. The vegetation is more interpretive because nobody can even really say like which particular hex was dense woods or which particular hex was light woods. But again, generally, I know that the densest woods were near the mill pond where you see that darker green. And I know that the lighter woods were in the higher areas. And ultimately, I think I have to agree with Mark Herman on this. I read in his Wargame design book that it's really not so much about any particular hex or how you rated any particular unit, in a wargame. It's really whether the whole thing comes together in a way that represents the history that you're trying to simulate. So to me, I did the best I could to represent the battlefield as it was in 1864, but we all know that it's just a model and all models are wrong to some extent. What matters is whether a model's useful. And so I think I will stand behind this model and say this model basically gives you the chance to experience the Battle of Atlanta as it happened, pretty much, or as close as we can come in Blind Swords.
Yeah, and who's going to be able to argue with you You know?
Someone will. I guarantee
Yes.
someone always
Yeah,
will.
I guarantee it too. We're getting close to the end of my slides, but this is I wanted to pop this one up. This is a what you call an Easter egg. This is
Oh, yeah.
for anybody who doesn't know. I mean, McPherson dies early on, and the Union lacks a leader for a while until Logan gets the battlefield promotion and comes in and works his magic. But this is obviously where McPherson fell, I would guess.
Yes, at least my estimate of it. Yes, James Birdseye McPherson was the only Union Army commander to be killed in action on a battlefield during the Civil War. There were other generals who fell, but no Army commander. And
yeah, that's high level.
Yeah, that's high level. And part of this is because the attack was a surprise, tactically a surprise. He knew and he did know an attack. He suspected an attack was coming, but he didn't really know it. And when the attack happened, he was having lunch over by the railroad with a couple other generals, and he heard the shooting. And some of the generals said, oh, they're probably hunting for some squirrels or something to eat for dinner or whatever, or there's some skirmishing. But he said, no, I think, he knew that was an attack coming in. So he very quickly got on his horse and started riding all over the battlefield in that area where the shooting had been heard. And while he was riding from the 16th Corps area to the 17th Corps, he went on a trail through some woods where he didn't know. He'd been warned that this area, some Confederates had been seen there, but that was earlier. They'd been skirmishers. But by the time he rode through there, he ran right into a unit of dismounted Texas cavalry, I think it was, that had already gotten to that point and was penetrating the Union position. And he was at close range. They ordered him to stop and surrender. And in the famous incident, he looked at them, he tipped his hat to them, and then he whirled his horse around and smiled and galloped away. And he tried kind of, I think, to do like a Comanche style thing where he bent down over the mane of his horse like that while he tried to escape. But the Confederate sergeant ordered the guy to shoot McPherson down, and they shot him, and the shot went through his back and I think out his shoulder and killed him, and he fell from his horse and died within about an hour and a half of the start of the battle.
Texagander wants your opinion on McPherson, overrated or not. I mean, obviously a favorite of Grant's and Sherman's, right?
Yeah. And I do suspect a lot of that had more to do with the fact it was an old boys club, and he was a very likable guy. You can almost see it in his picture. If you look at a picture of McPherson, he looks like somebody you'd enjoy, having a chat with. He has an amiable expression. He doesn't look like these Civil War generals who just scare the crap out of you when you look at their picture. He looks like a good guy. And so I think he was well liked. And also even General Hood liked him because he was roommates with Hood at West Point. So here they are facing each other. Hood's the Confederate commander at Atlanta, and McPherson's commanding the Army of the Tennessee. And that's why, this is one of those things where Sherman, the overall Union commander, said he didn't think that there'd be an attack. He thought that Atlanta would be theirs within 24 hours. And McPherson said, no, I know Hood, and I know he's going to attack. And McPherson said, okay, well, if he doesn't attack by noon tomorrow, I want you to take some of your troops and have them tear up the railroad. Don't worry about it. But McPherson really felt that there was going to be, maybe he had a premonition of his own death, perhaps, but he knew, and he kept some of his troops in position because he was expecting an attack against his left flank. And sure enough, he said, my old roommate, Hood, I knew he was going to. And Hood, after he heard McPherson had been killed, because the word got back to Hood's headquarters, he was very, sorrowful about it, because he said he probably never would have gotten through West Point if McPherson hadn't helped him with his homework and stuff like that. So,
well, speaking of the commanders, you had to make some design choices in this game too, because the top commander on each side is kind of absent.
Right. Yeah, and the whole thing of leaders in Blind Swords is an interesting thing, because an awful lot of 19th century era war games, command is handled with a counter on the map, right? I mean, and then you've got things like command radius, like if their units have to be within a certain number of hexes of a leader, and you've got these mechanics for how leaders operate on a battlefield. But Blind Swords, and this is something I love about it, it abstracts all of that, and you don't have the leaders on the battlefield encounters. You have them as events that get drawn, chits that come out of the cup, which represent the leader's effect. It's a design for effect. So the leader's effects are represented, but not the leader himself. So you don't have the leader in a specific place on the battlefield. You just sort of have their influence. And I think it does a great job of simulating command in the Civil War without actually having to literally do that kind of mechanical thing. But the other thing that Revolution, Roger and Richard told me when I said I wanted to do Atlanta was about leaders, is that leaders are not rated in Blind Swords for how good a general they were. You know, it's commonly assumed that the rating on a general's chit represents, oh, they were a good or a bad general. No, what that rating is meant to represent is how good a tactical commander they were that day. It's designed to represent how much influence did they have on the actual battle that was taking place right then and there. So you could have somebody who was a terrific army commander, but if he didn't really have a tactical influence on what happened in that game on that day, then you would rate him low. And so that was a very important concept for me. And that helped me when I looked at the generals and said, well, for example, if a general was absent or too far away to be effective, I needed to make sure that they wouldn't have an undue influence on the game. So I don't even have Hood in there as a commander-in-chief because he spent the whole battle over in Atlanta far away. He couldn't have any influence on the action at all, really.
And Hardy was not much better.
Hardy was, well, no, it was Cheatham who was also not accounted for on the battlefield. He was around, but he never really, there's no sign that he really had any tactical effect on his corps once the battle was joined. So he's not in the game either. Hardy is in the game, but he was hampered by the physical situation of where he was. He was with his corps, but he attacked in two different wings. I don't know if you want to put the map back on, but I can show that. I think I can show that. Yeah, if you look over on the right side of the map, you see there's kind of a Union position that's kind of shaped like the letter J on that ridge over there. That is where the battle began, and Hardy's corps attacked from the southern edge of the map. So they came up, and one wing, two divisions of Hardy's corps attacked there. And then Cleburne's and Maney's divisions attacked later on the left side of the map from the south, attacking where all that cluster of Union troops is. So they were so far apart that Hardy really couldn't exercise effective control over both wings of his corps at the same time. So the way I got around that was I have a Hardy commander-in-chief chit, but I have two of them. One is called Hardy left and one's called Hardy right. So this creates an interesting dilemma for the Confederate player, because each turn, when you decide which chits are going to go into your cup, you have to decide between Hardy left and Hardy right. So if you want to put a lot of energy into the right side attack, you're probably going to want to choose Hardy right. But that will mean that he'll have no effect on those two left-hand divisions during that turn. But next turn you can switch it up if you want to, and the Union player won't know which one you put in until it's drawn.
And then the thing with the CNC chits as well is, I don't know if you'll have this in your game, but often they have you'll have to roll a number or less to activate them.
That's right.
So you pull them, but they might be completely useless anyway.
That's right. And that's a gamble too. You might be hoping for them to come out and then they turn out to not be available and to do anything. Yeah, that's true. Some of them are rated pretty high, like a 5. So there's only like one chance in the 6 that you're going to not be able to use them. But then some of them are a little lower. Yeah.
Yeah. I've played games where there's just a 2 and it just doesn't.
Sweeney's division. Yeah. In this game, where that letter J position is, that's Sweeney's division. And Sweeney, it's a big controversy in the Battle of Atlanta. It was later claimed by some that he was drunk, but I don't know if that's true. But for whatever reason, General Dodge, who was the corps commander, basically took Sweeney's division away from him right in the middle of the battle and took direct tactical command over the division right in front of Sweeney's own men. And Sweeney was so furious and humiliated that it later led to a fist fight after the battle. And Sweeney faced a court-martial even over it. So it was a famous incident. And for that reason, it's not because Sweeney was a bad general, but just because he never really got to control his own division effectively in the battle. His corps commander did it for him. So he's rated 2, actually. And so you really depend on that Dodge CIC chit if you want Sweeney's division to really be fully effective.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the problem, I should point out, you should see the comment.
Somebody's. Oh, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. With the Union, you have a different challenge because McPherson dies, and you have to make the decision as a designer if you're going to even use him at all, right, or if you're going to put him in and just see if he dies, or if you're trying to influence when he dies. There's a lot of different ways to handle that, right?
There are, and I went through all of them pretty much thinking about it. And I took a lot. That's someplace too where, like Steve Carey, bless him, and other designers too that I've consulted about things like that, and ask how they would have done it, or how they've handled it when generals died in their battles. And I kind of listened to the idea that was such a significant event in the Battle of Atlanta and had so much to do with why the battle turned out the way it did, that if you don't have McPherson die, you don't really have the Battle of Atlanta that we know, So I do have him die historically at the historical time. Now, you could optionally have him live. But the other thing is, in order for that McPherson and Revenge event to come up, the one we talked about earlier where Logan goes crazy and does this amazing rally. Well, that never happens if McPherson lives. So, in order for that to be in the game, McPherson almost has to die when he dies. So I just have him in there for a couple turns as a CIC chit, but then he's gone. And then there's a few turns where the Union has no overall CIC. And then Logan gets promoted and shows up in the Cup again for a while.
Yeah. So, and if somebody wants to, they could just ignore that idea of, and just let them, there's nothing to say you can't do it the other way and just let it happen.
Yes, that's right.
But like you say, you'll miss out on that fabulous Logan stuff.
Yeah. So that's where I came down as a design choice anyway.
I think that's all the questions or things I wanted to talk about the game.
I should say one thing before we finish with the Atlanta game. I want to say, just as a disclaimer and to clarify, this game has not been officially announced by Revolution Games. They have not seen the game in its entirety, and they have not made any official commitment to publish it or develop it. So it's simply a project of mine that I hope will become part of the series. But it's, before you get too excited, it's a long way from being on anybody's table, I guess is the point.
Well, from everything we've seen about it on Discord, I'd be pretty surprised if Revolution didn't pick it up, because everything we've seen, it really fits the pocket, and right down to the fact that it's not a big 2-mapper. It's just that classic blind sword size that it fits on a table and you're right there, right? It's it's very compact for as big a battle as it is. Yeah, absolutely. And so much going on. What I've been impressed about with, following, I follow the Discord channel fairly regularly. I've been impressed by how much, I don't even want to call it chrome, because sometimes when we say chrome, it makes it sound like we're adding a whole bunch of extra fiddly rules, but it feels like you've got the stuff that could go in chrome. You've managed to find ways to just work it into the fabric of the game, like the smoke chart and things like that. it feels like it's not going to feel like in any way a generic Blind Swords game.
Yeah. Another challenge, though, is the multi-state units. Like, this is another big challenge with that. I'll just add that by 1864, a lot of regiments were so depleted that you had like, 3 or 4 or even more regiments that were all just basically company strength. And so, Blind Swords is a regimental scale game. So obviously the thing you have to do if you're going to preserve the system as it is, and what works about it, is you have to have a single counter that's representing a number of regiments all mushed together. And so that is what you see in this. Actually the challenge is going to be the artwork, because how do you represent like, the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, and 16th Tennessee on one counter with all those little numbers and slashes? I don't know how.
Even worse if they're not all from Tennessee, if it's like,
right, there's some Indiana/Illinois regiments in the Union Army and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
But I think we've seen a bit of that in the system before, where units have to be smushed into a single counter, and we've also seen the opposite, right, where a unit is so big and full of strength that it gets divided into an A and B, because it's just, otherwise it would be like 15 strength points or something.
Yeah, and that's, again, it's a design choice, because I feel that I took the liberty as the designer to say, okay, I'm starting with the order of battle as accurately as I can find it, down to the men in a brigade and the men in a particular regiment. But I will say that I think the order of battle for my game is accurate at brigade level. But as far as the actual strength points in a particular regiment, most of them are, I think, accurate. But in some cases, I've fudged the figures so that the brigade as a whole can operate tactically the way it would have operated. So what I mean is, there's a stacking limit of 12. So if I have 3 counters representing a brigade, I will sometimes move a factor to one of the units so that I can stack the 8 and the 4 together, because that way you can have 2 hexes and the full brigade can fire together. And it makes a big difference, because if you don't do that, then sometimes only 2 units can be firing and one of them can't. And that way the brigade loses a lot of its potential firepower. So I've tried to, adjust a few things here and there so that they function tactically.
Well, here's a question about when you're trying to decide unit strength and stuff like that. The important numbers on a unit counter is the strength, but also the cohesion rating. And I'm thinking that the strength is more or less just based on how many soldiers there are, right, whereas the cohesion is where you have to actually decide how well they're doing. And I guess my question is, you talked earlier about how the ratings for the generals is not based on how good that general is in history, but how well he performed and how on this particular day.
Right.
When you're assigning cohesion ratings to units, is it the same sort of thing? Like the Iron Brigade might have a day where they don't perform well, so they get a lower cohesion rating.
Yeah, same thing. What I did there was when I did all my reading, of the narrative histories of the Battle of Atlanta, I think I read about 3 main books for it, plus the official records, of course. I would just basically highlight anything where they mentioned a particular unit, distinguishing itself either for good or for bad. If they broke and ran, I made a note of it, or if they rallied and did a bayonet charge and went off on their, I made notes of all of that. So I would flag any units that seem worthy of a special variation, because basically in Blind Swords, your baseline cohesion rating is a 4. That means kind of the normal unit. So it's really pretty simple, because to me, any unit that particularly did badly is a 3, and any unit that distinguished itself in a particular way becomes a 5. And that way you're still leaving room for it to fail if there's a 6 or whatever. So you're just below average and above average, and then you have the broad median, I think.
Well, I'm glad to get that. I'm glad to actually talk to a designer about how they decide to do that, because
that's how I did it anyway.
Yeah. Well, in particularly the thing with generals in Civil War games, especially the strategic ones, a new game comes out and there's just instantly chatter and moaning and complaining about the ratings of the generals. Everybody's got their favorites. Everybody's got the way they think it ought to be. But you have to make history come out the way, like it's got to have some. Just because somebody was a great general overall doesn't mean they were a great general on the day.
That's right. That's right. And
if you make him, like, if you rate him great, then I suppose there's a way to do that where you just go, okay, well, most of the times he's going to win, but every once in a while history is actually going to happen and he's going to lose. I think the way you do it is more interesting because it gives you a better game.
Well, that's the thing too, and in the end, that's what we're all trying to do, is to give a good game. And if I have to make a choice one way or the other, and it's 50-50, like right on the knife edge, I tend to err on the side of trying to give the players a good game and make it competitive. Other designers might say, no, my priority is to make an accurate representation of the history. And so if I have to come down one way or the other, I'll go with what happened historically, even if it's not as fun a game. But I think, especially with victory conditions, that's a lot where that comes into play, where I try to make it so I say, okay, I'm going to look at this map that's on the screen right now and say, I don't have any victory conditions yet, but I'm going to look at those hexes. You see those colored discs? That's where I've marked VP hexes that are controlled at this point. I'll look at it and say, okay, which ones did the Confederates actually capture historically? Because they're the attacking side, right? I'll count those up and I'll say, all right, that's the baseline, because as long as the Confederates do as well as they did historically, it's basically a draw. So in order for the Confederates to win, they have to have more than what I'm seeing at that point. And so if they do capture a number of those main trench line hexes, that would be one thing. Or if they got to some of those VP hexes that are red, you see up in the northern part of the map, there's some Confederate only victory hexes. If they actually got that far, that would be pretty special, and that would be victory. So that starts to point me in the direction of kind of what the 50-50 draw level would be historical, almost like Battle of the Bulge games, where people say, well, the Germans couldn't have won the Battle of the Bulge, but if they do better than they did historically, that's a German victory, right? It's the same idea.
Yeah. Well, unless anybody's got some more questions, I thank you so much for this, because this is we've really got to talk a lot about the nuts and bolts of how someone designs blind swords games. This is really the nitty gritty.
Yeah, well, I'm happy to share it. I don't think there needs to be any great mystery or secrecy about it. I like to share what I do, and I'm just another person learning. I'm just another player who's found myself doing this over time, and I learn from the players a lot. In fact, I will say that a lot of good ideas have come from the community on the Discord channel, where they've seen some of the things I've posted and said, have you thought of this or that? And I'm very open to that. I like hearing it, because the worst thing for a designer is you get it all published and it's out, and then somebody comes out of the woodwork and says, you could have done this. And then the designer goes, oh yeah, that would have been a great idea. Oh, status on the night drop. No, I'm sorry. I don't think any of the Revolution folks are here tonight, are they?
I don't think so.
Okay. If not, I'll just say that they did buy the design, and they did play test it at a couple of conventions last year, but I haven't seen anything on their site actually announcing it as for pre-order or even as an upcoming title. So I think it is in the pipeline. I'm confident to say it is in the pipeline, but because of all the uncertainties about printing and tariffs and, everybody's business these days, I really think that probably it's anybody's guess when it's going to actually come out. And I'm, like everybody, I'm just waiting to hear from that.
Thanks,
Thank
Joe.
You, Joe. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. That's high praise coming from one of my favorite content creators, for sure. There was one other. Can I find it here? I'll get to the end.
Oh yeah.
you have an interview coming out in this magazine, is that right?
Yeah, C3I. It's the issue that's in pre-order right now. It just came out. It was sad to say Roger McGowan's final issue that he worked on, and but it's C3I coming out. It's up for pre-order on their site, and there's an interview with me in there. And I talk about some of the same things about how I got started, but I also go into some other things too. So I would urge people, if they're more curious about me or my work, to get that issue. It's got, I think, 2 or maybe even 3 games in it too.
I think it has 3 games this
packed.
time.
Yeah.
That's what I
Other
heard.
thing I want to make sure to mention is that if you're interested in A Glorious Chance, the War of 1812 on the Lakes game, I actually will be doing a live playthrough. Well, I'm not doing the playthrough. It's actually Tony at Tony's Board Game Life who's doing the playthrough on Wednesday, August 6th at 2 p.m. Eastern. That'd be 11 a.m. West Pacific. He's going to play A Glorious Chance, on Basil and share his screen. And I'm going to be on there just to pretty much do color commentary and talk about the game as he does it, and maybe help coach him through the rules and things like that. So anybody who's interested could get a pretty in-depth look at that game in about a week. So yeah,
we definitely have a few War of 1812 fans here tonight that we've heard from.
great.
I totally encourage anybody to buy this C3I magazine as well. They never disappoint. It's if this is the last one ever, that will be a sad thing too. But that all is, to the best of my knowledge, is a bit still up in the air. I don't know what's going to happen. But just the game that's referenced on the cover, Trevor Bender, this is his 3rd game in these magazines, and the previous 2 have been great fun. So there we go. Something for everybody. Well, all right. Well, thank you very much, Gina. We'll wrap things up. And thanks to everybody for coming out tonight. This was wonderful. I think I might have to talk some other designers into sharing their design secrets. So many of my other interviews have been about, what you design this, you design that, but we haven't got into the nuts and bolts like tonight. That's fantastic. And I should also say, if you're at all interested in Blind Swords, come by the Discord server. You can talk to Gina there. You can talk to some other designers who are working on projects that they're going to pitch to Revolution, or Steve Carey's there quite often talking about his stuff. If you're into Blind Swords, the Discord server has really become a good place to hang out and talk Blind Swords. All right. Good night to everyone, and we'll see you again in a couple of weeks.